Continue our coverage on the disappearance of Sydney Loof. We wanted to know how specifically the FBI handles missing persons cases.
Retired special agent in charge of Omaha's FBI division, Wesyan Dun, is here. You've investigated cases like this. First of all, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Where do you begin? Where do investigators start with a case like this?
The first place you'll typically start is with the missing person, the victim, if you will. Investigators will attempt to learn all that they can about the person, who they associated with, where they tend to like to go, who they typically remain in contact with. And starting in concentric circles close to the victim, they start moving out and trying to develop more and more information, talking to people who know them to get a good idea of the person's typical patterns. Because then once you know the person's typical patterns, you can start looking for the anomalies. For example, if you know that they're always in touch with a certain person at a certain time, typically, you would talk to that person and find out when the pattern changed, when they last heard from them, and obviously if they've heard from them recently.
Wesyan, thank you for joining us, by the way, on this special report. It's an important topic, and your name carries a lot of weight in this community. Let me ask you this. As time elapses, the common knowledge is that the longer a search goes for a missing person, the more the outcome might be negative. Is that still the case in today's line of thinking?
Generally it is, because the longer the time goes by, the more chance there is that something bad has happened to the person. But that is not a hard and fast rule by any means. There have been cases, many highly publicized cases, where people have been missing for years and suddenly resurfaced. So I wouldn't let the lapse of time in and of itself suggest that the person is no longer alive.
One thing that struck me about this case is the social media element of it. She met one of the person of interest on social media. She last known account is a Snapchat, and now here we are with these Facebook posts for these persons of interest. How has technology and social media changed the work of law enforcement?
Well, it's resulted in some dramatic changes, both in terms of new challenges that have been presented, but also new opportunities. It's interesting you mentioned that, because less than a decade ago, this sort of case would not have played out in the public view on social media the way it has now. If individuals, the two people who are persons of interest, for example, in years past, if they wanted to get a statement out, they probably would have called a media outlet or called a trusted friend or relative and said, hey, please convey this to people. But in this day and age, they just go on social media.
Can I follow up on Jenny's question? The people, the persons of interest who went on social media, they made statements. As an expert and as someone who looks at that statement, what did you see in their statements that either tilted you one way or the other, and what jumped out at you?
Well, it would be very difficult to draw any conclusions based on what they posted on social media. But what I can say is that, first of all, typically when somebody really protests their innocence very, very strongly, that causes one to question, why are they doing that? Secondly, it was apparent to me, based on some of the social media posts, that they were motivated in part because of comments that people made. And that suggests that would give, I think, people who are behavioral analysts a lot of fodder to think about, and potentially give some ideas on how to structure the investigation.
Thank you so much for offering your expertise in this case. We truly appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Good to see you, Wesyan.
Likewise.
Sydney Loof's